How many want your cup filled? Come on, I come that my cup filled. Come on, get your cups ready to receive what God has. Come on, tell him, Lord, fill my cup. Come on, say, Lord, fill my cup. Come on, say, Lord, fill my cup. Lord, fill my cup. Fill my cup. Hallelujah. Come on, come on, come on. Come on. I heard them saying the Holy Ghost is here now. And because the Holy Ghost is here, ask him to fill your cup. Let it overflow. Fill my cup. Fill my cup. Fill my cup. Fill my cup. Oh! Magnify God for his goodness and his mercy unto us. And he continues to do great things. We've had some church thus far. Yes. Amen. Whatever you need. Amen. Whatever you were in need of. Amen. It was in the house. Amen. The anointing of the Lord came in. And that's what we expect. And that's what we look for. I want to turn your attention to 2 Kings. I'm about to go to the 7th chapter. And I won't be before you long, I don't believe. But we'll see what the Lord has for us. Here it is, as we read King, we find here the ministry of two individuals, Elijah and Elisha. Here we are as we begin to look through the Word of God. We see that Elijah asked to be the successor for Elisha. The purpose of Elisha's ministry was to restore the respect to God's house, to restore respect for God and the Word. And he stood firmly against the evil of the enemy. He stood firmly on the promises of God. Through faith and courage and prayer, he not only revealed the judgments of God, but he also revealed the mercies and the love of God. Elisha showed that God was in control of anything and everything that we're going through. In the 7th chapter, as we get to this place, Elijah had already predicted there were going to be a famine in the land. So he says these words in the 7th chapter. Then Elisha said, "Hear ye the word of the Lord. Thus said the Lord, tomorrow about this time shall a measure of fine flour be sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel in the gate of Samaria. Then a Lord on whose hand the king leaned answered the man of God and said, Behold, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, might this thing be? And he said, Behold, thou shalt see it with thine eyes, but thou shalt not eat thereof." You may be seated in the presence of the Lord. So as I began to look at this word, and I began to see here, I love one thing that Elijah said here. He said, "Thus said the Lord, tomorrow about this time."
Come on, son.
Tomorrow
about
this time.
Yes.
So as I began to look at this, and I began to study and began to read, and as Elijah began to share, there was a promise. As I already shared with you, that Elijah ministry, not only did they talk about the famine, did they not only talk about the judgment, but they also talked about the mercies of God, the humility and the love of God. So it was very important that not only do we understand that there is a judgment that God has for us, for them that goes contrary to his word, but we also find that there is a mercy and a love everlasting. But in order for us to get that, we have to maintain the promises of God. So here it is, and Elijah begins to talk. He says about tomorrow, this time. Many times in our lives, God has given us a promise. God has told us what he's going to do for us. But because of who we are, we can't wait until tomorrow. We live in this world and we want everything quick, now, and in a hurry. So as I begin to read this, I want to say to you this morning, don't abort the promise.
Come on, sir.
We are in a place now where we are aborting the promises that God has. So as I began to look at this morning, as I was in the shower, and I began to talk to God, and I said, well, God, where would I go with this? And as I began to talk to him, the first thing that came to me was there is this season, this time when women become pregnant. Some of those women that when they get pregnant, they suffer a miscarriage. It happened for a myriad of reasons. Don't know them all, don't know why. So I began to think, I said, well, if one is going to suffer a miscarriage, I said, God, there has to be some type of knowledge. There has to be a way, a sense to understand that this was about to take place. And so, since I don't know a lot about it, I had to begin to research. So I found that it brings forth mild to severe cramps. It brings forth some back pain. Then I seen this part that really caught my eye. And it says a loss of pregnancy symptoms. That got me excited. It got me excited because when I correlate this to the Word of God in this particular chapter, I find what happens. We lose a sense of the symptoms of what God has us for the blessing. So what happens is you begin to lose every symptom. Well, what are you talking about, brother preacher? You lose your joy. You lose your peace. You lose your fight. Because why? What was there has now been aborted. But he says to here that there was a famine in the land. He said that in the midst of this famine, God spoke. Famine being that there's nothing there. I want you to know on this morning that there's a season in the time of your life that God's going to speak to you in a dry place. There's going to be nothing there. There's no life. There's nothing. But yet God speaks to you and says, this is what I'm going to do for you. Because I'm in this dry place. Because I can't see anything. Because I can't feel anything. I don't believe that it's going to happen. So what happens is, for every promise, for every prophecy, for every dream, there is a set time.
All right.
Prophecy comes. Dreams come. Who would have ever known with Joseph when he had his dream, there was a set time for his dreams to come to fruition. But he had to go through hell before the dream came to pass. This is to say that there is an appointed time for the word or the promise of the dream to become manifested in our lives. Yes. There is a manifestation that God has for us, that he wants to give to us. But what happens is that we get tired in the wait. So what happens is we're walking around and thinking that I'm still pregnant with the promise, but what happened is that you've already aborted the promise. Yes. The blessing, the dream that God has for us is just like when a farmer plants a seed. When the farmer plants the seed, he sows it. And there's a process that the seed goes through before it can bring forth a harvest. When the Lord has planted a seed in you, there's some things that you've got to go through before the harvest comes. The seed is just not going to be planted and boom, it's going to come to pass. But there's a process for the seed. First of all, in order for the seed to grow, it's got to be planted in good soil. It's got to be planted in good ground. If I'm expecting the seed to grow, I can't plant the seed in the midst of thorns and weeds and expect it to come forth. Many of us believe that we can plant anywhere and we're going to get a blessing.
Right. Come on.
Yes, something's going to come up.
Yeah.
Something's going to rise up.
Come on.
But when it begins to rise up, the weeds begins to choke it.
Yes.
The Bible said that the sun comes out and it begins to scorch it. Yes. Why? Because you didn't plant the seed on good ground.
Come on, preacher.
So your seed has been planted. And now we're in a place that I have to learn how to wait. If I want the seed to begin to grow, I've got to allow, look at this. The seed, when you get it, the seed already looks like it's dead. Because the seed is all dried up. But then you got to plant the seed into the soil. And the seed that already looks like it's dead, it yet has to die once it gets in the ground.
Come on.
Once it begins to die, it then begins to germinate. And as it begins to germinate, that thing that was dead begins to come alive. So it looks like that the seed that's been planted has no life. It looks like the seed that's been planted has no value. But you've got to allow the seed to be planted, and you've got to allow it to be buried, and you've got to allow it to germinate. While I'm waiting for the seed to go through the process, there's some things that's required of you. You got to go out and you got to make sure that the weeds are not growing where you're expecting your harvest. You got to make sure that you're watering the seed that has been planted. But more importantly, you got to make sure where you've got it planted that it's getting plenty of sunlight. Yeah. So there's some work that has to be done in order for the seed to come to fruition. Yes. Well, if I'm expecting for the blessings of God to come forth, there's some things that I've got to do. Once the seed has been planted, I got to then begin to get in the Word of God. Because it's the Word of God that'll begin to water the seed. I've got to begin to fast and pray because these are the things that'll take the weeds away. Because if I don't fast and if I don't pray, the weeds are going to come and kill your seed before it grows. For the harvest time comes. So, we're going through waiting for God to happen. Waiting for God to bless. But the issues that we have is that we get so tired of waiting.
Come on.
We get tired of waiting because why? Days have now passed.
Yes.
Weeks have now passed. Months have now passed. And while you're waiting, you now begin to say, well, it's not going to happen.
True.
The spirit of doubt now comes in. Now you begin to say, well, I'm not going to be delivered. You begin to say, well, the blessings aren't for me. Yes, I know the prophet said that God was going to bless me with this and that, but I've waited a year and I still don't see it. So what happens is then now you're getting tired. You're tired of waiting. So when you get tired of waiting, you go back to what you're accustomed to.
True. Come on.
You get tired of waiting, so you go back like a dog to his bone.
Break it down.
You no longer are praying. You're no longer happy the way you were when you got the prophecy. The same way that you behave when the prophecy came, it's got to be the exact same way you got to be while you wait.
Say it, preacher.
Bible said, all of my appointed time, I'm going to wait.